العالمين نحمده ونستعينه ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ به من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له من بعده والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين بالقاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. I begin this khutbah as we begin all of our khutbah of Jumu'ah with an admonishment, a reminder for all of us to foster within ourselves taqwa, fear of Allah. And this is a constant consciousness that we should have within ourselves that stems from our faith in Allah, where we are always aware of Him, always aware of His presence, His ever-seeing eye, always thinking about His pleasure and displeasure in every decision that we make. And if we can manifest that taqwa within ourselves, then that means that our faith in Allah is strong, and that faith is now translating itself into a way of thinking and a way of making our decisions in our life. What I'd like to talk about today is the etiquette around clothing. Right? This is something that we have a lot of guidance about in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam. And this is something that we should always remind ourselves about, so that we think about what it means to dress like a Muslim, and what our gatherings should look like, especially our masajid should look like, in terms of how we look and how we adorn ourselves and prepare ourselves for coming into the masjid. Allah speaks about this in the Quran, so I want to spend the first khutbah speaking about some verses from Surah Al-A'raf, where Allah speaks about clothing, about libas. And then in the second khutbah, I'm going to bring a couple of ahadith that speak about teachings from the Ahlul Bayt, about how they used to dress and how they advise us to dress in various circumstances. Recite salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allah says in Surah Al-A'raf, in a section close to the beginning, He begins the surah by recounting the story of Adam and Hawa. Right? And He tells us about their brief time in Jannah, in this garden, and there are two things that Allah told them. Two commandments. One was a commandment saying that there's a tree, one particular tree that you're not allowed to eat from. Anything else is free game, it's fair game, but this one tree you must stay away from. And the second thing He told them was that shaitan is your enemy, so beware of what he says. Right? And then it tells us the story of how they were duped by shaitan, and he told them that you should eat actually from this one tree, and if Allah has told you not to eat from it, He's playing a trick on you. And I swear that I am an honest and well-wishing advisor for you, and they buy it. Now there are many questions theologically about how is this possible, how could a prophet make such a mistake and not recognize Iblis? The short answer, which we get from the Ahlul Bayt, is that this time in the garden was a miniature childhood for Adam and Hawa. And they didn't have the luxury of childhood like we do. Right? We grow up and we have no responsibility for many years of our life. Like 15, 9 years, we live with our parents, we have no legal responsibility before Allah. Right? We do make mistakes, we do terrible things, we do wrong things, we hurt people at that age, but we're not responsible for any of it. And all through that time, if we have good parents and good family, then they are there to teach us and help us and train us to eventually know what's right and wrong, so that when we do have responsibility at the age of taklif, when we're 15 or 9 for boys and girls, then we already know what it means to be right and wrong. We already know what it means to obey Allah. Right? Adam and Eve didn't have this. Right? They're created as adults. Or whatever age they're already adults when they're created. And so Allah gave them a miniature childhood. Right? The ahadith say for 7 hours they lived in this garden. Right? So whatever the time frame was, they lived in this garden for a little bit of time without any responsibility, just like children have no responsibility. But still advice, right? Admonishment that Allah gives them, like as parents, right? We don't leave our children to say, well, they have no responsibility, so they can do whatever they want to do. Let them break, let them run around the masjid, let them break things in my house. It doesn't matter because they have no responsibility. That's not the way we deal with them. And we're not supposed to deal with them that way. While they have no responsibility right now, we have a responsibility to train them so that by the time they are mukallaf and mukallafa, They should already be on the right track and know what's right and wrong, know what it means to obey, and know the consequences of disobedience. So all of this, Allah taught Adam and Eve with their incredible aptitude, their incredible intelligence, and spiritual purity. They learned this lesson very quickly. It takes us 15 years. They learned it in a few hours in the garden. Right? So anyway, in a nutshell, that's what the garden was for and what they did in the garden. But after telling the story and telling us about how when they ate from the tree, they realized their nakedness, and that shaitan was really the one who made them naked and made them expose themselves in such a way that they felt embarrassed, they had to cover themselves with leaves. And then Allah tells us that we, the children of Adam, should beware of shaitan making us naked. All right, so let me read some of the verses and you can see how clothing also plays a role. So eating and clothing play an important role in the story. They weren't supposed to eat from the tree, and then the clothing of decency that they thought they had is stripped from them when they eat from the tree. When they disobey Allah, they lose that protection. Allah says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا بني آدم قد أنزلنا عليكم لباسا يواري سوآتكم وريشا. The children of Adam now, he's talking to us. Right? He's told us the story of Adam and Eve. And now as children of Adam, he's telling us that we should remember that Allah is the one who has sent down for us clothing that has two purposes. One is yuwari sawatikum. Sawa is our indecency, our shame, right? Ugliness, right? Meaning our bodies. So one of the important purposes of clothing for which Allah has created it and ordained it for us is to cover ourselves. Right? So it covers our sawa wa risha. But it's not just for that bare necessity of being decent. Allah has also given us clothing to adorn ourselves. Rish, they say originally refers to the adorning feathers of male birds. Peacocks and roosters and these, they have beautiful feathers. Right? That's rish. And so the rish is used for our clothing as well. It's the nice clothes, the fine clothes that you wear for adornment, as opposed to just regular day-to-day clothing, which is just regular libas. So these are two important purposes that Allah has sent clothes down for us. And of course, He doesn't send clothes down. He says this a few times in the Quran. He says, أَنزَلْنَا الْحَدِيدِ. We sent down iron. Right? He's not talking about sending down iron in spaceships or like in meteors and things like that. He says the same thing about cows, like cattle. That He sent down these different kinds of cattle for us to use. Again, He didn't send cows down from the skies and rain them down on earth. And He created them in whatever process we understand that they were created in, right? Whether through evolution or through whatever else. But He created them and then created a system for them to do their thing. But He refers to this as inzal, the same way He talks about Quran as being inzal, sending something down. What He means is He decides these things on high, in His realm, in His greatness. He decides, does khalq and taqdeer, apportions and decides what things are going to be created, how they're going to be created, to what purpose, how long will they last, all the details of those things. He decides that, and then He sends down the command that this will be created, this will be made on earth. Right? And so when we make our clothes, right, we're the ones who grow the crops that lead to that cotton, or raise those animals that lead to that wool, or synthesize that petroleum and then make it into polyester and these kinds of things. We make all those things. We sew the clothes. Right? But Allah says, I'm the one who sent down these clothes for you. Right? Because everything that we do, right? خَلَقَكُمْ وَمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. Allah created not only us, but everything we do is also His creation. Right? Just because we do it doesn't mean that we're independently doing it. We do it because He has given us the power, the intelligence, the ingenuity to do that thing. So everything that we do is actually Him doing it through us. Right? So everything can be attributed to Him. So He says, I've sent down these clothes for these two purposes. Then He immediately says, وَلِبَاسُ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. Right? So clothing serves these two purposes that are outward purposes. Right? Our physical bodies need to be covered for the sake of decency, and so He's given us clothing to guard ourselves against indecency. Secondly, He's given us clothing not only for guarding against indecency, but also to beautify ourselves so that we look decent and we look beautiful amongst ourselves. But He says that more important than the covering of outward indecency, you have indecency inside. You have spiritual indecency that comes from disobedience of Allah, that comes from sin. right? That comes from having moral traits and ways of thinking and attitudes that are drawing you away from Allah. The remedy for that, the way to cover up those things, is not by having fancier clothes. Your fancy clothes are not going to cover up a sinful character. What you need to cover up that is to wear the clothing of taqwa. If you foster taqwa within yourself, that will cover up, not cover up in a superficial way that I keep the evil character, but I assume an attitude or an affect of taqwa. That's hypocrisy, that's nifaq. That's not what he's asking us to do. He wants us to foster real taqwa within ourselves. As we fear Allah, and that manifests itself within us, then we'll automatically drive out sin. We'll refuse to disobey Allah. We'll refuse to do anything that takes us away from Allah. We'll be kind to people, we'll be good to people, we'll be just and refuse injustice. Right? All of those are effects of taqwa. And so he says that is an even better garb that you should don. Not that you should throw away the garb of beauty or of decency. That should also stay in place, and that's a blessing that you should recognize and use. But recognize that even more important than this blessing of Allah is the blessing of taqwa, which is a garb that you should adorn yourself with inside, which will guard you against all indecency and will also beautify you. The same way your garb can beautify you on an outward level, your taqwa is what beautifies you inside, spiritually, and of course that manifests itself outward as well. ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ ذَلِكَ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَذَكَّرُونَ وَيَذَّكَّرُونَ. Then he says, يَا بَنِي آدَمْ لَا يَفْتِنَنَّكُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ كَمَا أَخْرَجَ أَبَوَيْكُمْ مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ يَنْزِعُ عَنْهُمَا لِبَاسَهُمَا لِيُرِيَهُمَا سَوْآتِهِمَا. Right, so he says, again to us, drawing the lesson from what happened to Adam and Eve and their deception by Iblis. He says, you children of Adam, learn the lesson from your two forefathers, your mother and father. And don't let shaitan strip you of your clothing the way he stripped them of their clothing. Now, he didn't go and pull their clothes off. They were already naked. There's no need for clothing in that situation. Again, like children, right? If a little child runs around without clothes on in the house, there's no problem with that. He and she have no responsibility. You have no responsibility with regard to them. There's no issue of decency and indecency at that age. And so Adam and Eve also, in their circumstance, there was no one else. They're mahram for each other. There's no need for clothing. They had no concept of clothing, just like a child doesn't know any better. You put clothing on an infant or not put clothing, it doesn't make a difference for them. Right? Until we socialize them, until we teach them and we train them that clothing is important, nakedness is wrong, and these kinds of things, then they start to learn those things as they grow older. So at that age, those first moments in paradise, it made no difference to them. But one of the effects of eating from the fruit, which was done by shaitan, or they were led to it by shaitan, is that now they realize their own nakedness. That was always there, but they realize that it's indecent and then they want to cover themselves. So he says, don't let this happen to you. And don't let shaitan do what he did to Adam and Eve by convincing you to become indecent. Right? Where he messes with your sense of taqwa, your fear of Allah, and now you start to do indecency, sin against Allah, and you also become naked in a spiritual manner, that you're now an embarrassment to yourself. Right? You've now undermined the very purpose for which Allah has created you, and you're an embarrassment to yourself. Don't let that happen to you. That you feel like you have to cover yourself superficially, when actually something very deep inside of you has become corrupted because you've listened to shaitan and you've corrupted yourself. And then he goes on, he mentions some things. The next verse says, وَإِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً. So what do we do? Say I am corrupted. I didn't listen to Allah. I listened to shaitan. I became corrupt. I no longer have taqwa. I'm ashamed for myself. Right, what do we do naturally? We become defensive. Right? A person who does something wrong and obviously knows that he's doing wrong, he's not content doing wrong, calling it wrong, and saying, oh well. Wait, we try to somehow rationalize and justify that actually no, what I'm doing is not wrong, it's actually right, and here's the reason why. I'll pass the buck and say, oh, it's because so-and-so taught me or so-and-so told me. It's actually his fault. Or no, you're seeing it wrong, and actually, what you see as being wrong is actually right, and here's the justification. Well, you find ways to twist things around and spin it in such a way that the corruption that we have becomes somehow palatable to ourselves, and then hopefully we hope that we can dupe other people and they'll also see us as being good when actually we're evil. So he characterizes that. Allah, he says, وَإِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً قَالُوا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهَا آبَاءَنَا. Right? When a person who's corrupted like this and who has ripped off the clothing of taqwa, when he does this, he says that the only reason I'm doing this is because my forefathers, is their tradition. I'm just following in the footsteps of my forefathers. They told me to do it, and so I'm doing it. وَاللَّهُ أَمَرْنَا بِهَا. Or he says that actually Allah is the one who's told us to do this. And he passes the buck to Allah and says, Allah has commanded us to do it, so I'm doing it. If you don't like it, that's your problem. Allah is the one who's told me, so He's my justification for it. قُلْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَأْمُرُ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ. The response to this person is that you're trying to make evil deeds into something good by saying Allah told you to do it. Allah never tells us to do fahsha. He never commands us to do something that's abhorrent, that's evil. أَتَقُولُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Do you attribute something to Allah that you have no knowledge of? And then he goes on and says that Allah commands to do what's good and these sorts of things. A few verses down he says, يَا بَنِي آدَمْ خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ. And this gets to our topic about adornment and dressing and how we should dress, especially in places of gathering, masajid in particular. The verse says, O children of Adam, who have now learned the lesson from their forefather, realize that libas, clothing on the outward level, is important, is a blessing from Allah, to guard yourself against indecency and to adorn yourself. And then there's taqwa, which is also an important blessing and clothing that we have, in fact more important than the outward clothing. He says, take up adornment, adorn yourselves عند كل masjid, whenever you go to a masjid. And the commentators say, when he mentions masjid, but it actually has a more expansive meaning. It's not just in the physical, formal masjid that we talk about, but any place of ibadah, and whether it's in your house or outside, whenever you engage in ibadah in particular, salah and dhikr and dua, خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ. Right? Take up adornment, adorn yourselves when you engage in this. And then, just like I said, he mentions clothing and food. Then he says, وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. We'll leave that aside. He's talking about food and eating and the etiquette of that. The next verse says, قُلْ مَنْ حَرَّمَ زِينَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي أَخْرَجَ لِعِبَادِهِ وَالطَّيِّبَاتِ مِنَ الرِّزْقِ. Who dares to make haram the adornment that Allah has made halal? He's the one who's brought it forth, who's made this clothing that's an adornment for us. He's given this as a blessing for us. Who amongst you dares to make that haram when Allah has given it to you as something halal and good? All right. So these are some verses that talk about clothing. The verse that says, خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ masjid is of particular concern for us today. Well, what I wanted to talk about is the etiquette for how we adorn ourselves, how we dress, especially when we come to the masjid. Right, so we have, this verse is explicit, telling us that we should adorn ourselves. Right, we have a habit of becoming very casual and coming very casually into the masjid, when in reality we should come into this place as a holy place. It's the house of Allah. It's a place that has special rules that are different from any other place. Right, any other place that you go in our vicinity has separate rules, and when you enter the masjid, there are particular rules. And there's a particular border of this masjid that goes up to those pillars in the back. The back of the masjid is not masjid anymore. When you walk into the foyer, that's not masjid. The parking lot's not masjid. This particular space right here, from that wall to that wall, back to the pillars and up to the mihrab, this is masjid. And there are particular rules of honor and respect that we have to pay to it. Right, one, for instance, is impurity is not allowed here. Now, if any impurity falls on the carpet or on the walls within this masjid, it becomes our duty as a group here to immediately drop everything. If you're in the middle of salah and you find that, say, a child has made the carpet najis, and you realize that, quit your prayer. Cleaning that najasa and making it pure is a higher priority in terms of speed. You need to rush to that. You have time to pray, right? You have time until Maghrib to pray your Dhuhr and Asr. But your obligation to purify the masjid is immediate. And so we're supposed to quit our prayer and rush to clean that najasa from the masjid because of the sanctity of this place. Right? It might seem like a small thing, but if you recognize that that's the kind of honor, I think how much prayer is spoken about and what kind of a role prayer has in the Islamic worldview, and then he says, well, this is even more immediate of a responsibility that you have than offering your prayers. Not more important in the grand scheme of things, but more immediate. It's a wajib fawri. Must be attended to immediately, as opposed to prayer, which is a wajib muwassa'. You have time to offer it within its allotted time. And so when we come to the masjid, we should take this seriously. Khudu zinatakum, adorn yourselves. Right? Don't come in casual clothes like you would go to play sports or to lounge around your house, and then come in those same clothes into the masjid. Make it a special ritual for yourself that when you're coming to the masjid, especially for something like this, a Jum'ah prayer, an Eid prayer, a gathering, right? Adorn yourselves, dress the way you would dress at the best occasions. The cleanest clothes, but also the best clothes that you have, right? Oftentimes, especially with younger kids, you'll see that they'll wear athletic clothes. They'll have flip-flops and baseball caps and these kinds of things as they walk into the masjid. And there's no difference between how they look here and how they would look out on the sports field or how they would look at school. That should not be the case. We should honor the masjid by honoring this verse, listening to what Allah has told us, خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ. Take up your adornment, adorn yourselves whenever you come to the masjid. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar, fasalli li rabbika wanhar, inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. Salawat Allah. Allahumma salli ala Allahumma salli ala Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashraf al-anbiya'i wal-mursaleen. Muhammadin wa ala ahli baytihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli wa sallim ala Muhammadin Rasulullah wa ala Aliyin Amir al-Mu'mineen wa ala Fatimata al-Zahra wa ala al-Hasan wal-Husayn wa Ali ibn al-Husayn wa Muhammad ibn Ali wa Ja'far ibn Muhammad wa Musa ibn Ja'far wa Ali ibn Musa wa Muhammad ibn Ali wa Ali ibn Muhammad wa al-Hasan ibn Ali wa al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan al-Qa'im al-Mahdi salawatullahi alayhim ajma'in. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Yes, please move forward. So in the second khutbah, I'll also remind myself and all of us to foster this taqwa within ourselves. Now we've mentioned this verse, libasu taqwa dhalika khair. So all the guarding and protection that you want to shield yourself against your own indecency, right? We pay a lot of attention to our clothing. We should pay even more attention to the taqwa within ourselves, which is our spiritual clothing, that will adorn us, that will protect us against spiritual indecency, so that we can stand proud before Allah in the spiritual realm and be obedient servants of His that have this quality of taqwa. Like I mentioned, I want to share a few ahadith in the same vein about libas, about clothing, and some of the guidance that we get from the Ahlul Bayt regarding clothing. So the first hadith, these are from Makarim al-Akhlaq. This is a book by At-Tabarsi. And he goes through all the different areas of life and quotes the different sunan from the Prophet and from the Ahlul Bayt about those things. Food and clothing and interacting with people and marriage and all the different aspects of life that you can think of. Not legal rulings, but rather the ethical traits, the sunnah behind these particular actions. This first hadith says that a person came to the Prophet ﷺ. And so he was in his quarters, this is in Medina, he was in his quarters and the person calls from outside or knocks on the door. And so before the Prophet exits his quarters to meet the person, he finds a pan or a pot that was filled with water, and he uses that as a mirror, looks at himself, fixes his beard, combs his hair, makes himself look good before he goes out to meet this person. Right, nowadays we just use a mirror, but the hadith mentions that he had a rakwa that was filled, some sort of a container that was filled with water, and he used that as a mirror to adorn himself. And so when he goes out and he meets the person and he comes back, his wife Aisha mentions, he kind of speaks in awe of this and says that you are the messenger of Allah, you're the best of creation and all of this, and yet you took time to comb your beard, fix your beard, and comb your hair before going out to meet someone. His response is, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ أَنْ إِذَا خَرَجَ عَبْدُهُ الْمُؤْمِنِ إِلَىٰ أَخِيهِ أَن يَتَهَيَّأَ لَهُ وَأَن يَتَجَمَّلَ. Allah loves for us when we encounter our fellow believers, when we go to meet our fellow believers, that we adorn ourselves. Right? We do tajammul, we become jameel. Right? So we do whatever we need to do to groom ourselves, dress properly, comb, and prepare ourselves in a way that is appropriate for that particular person that we're going to be meeting. Another hadith from Imam al-Rida alayhi salatu wassalam. So in the context of our households, right, sometimes we think, well, fine, I'll dress nicely for outside. When I go to work, I'll wear my best. When I go to a wedding, I'll wear my best. Okay, now after today's khutbah, when I go to the masjid, I'll wear my best too. What about home? When I'm at home, can I just wear my shabby clothes and my sweatpants and t-shirts and torn clothes, whatever it is, because it's comfortable? Right? Even there, we have advice that no, you shouldn't dress like that. There's a time to dress down, right? You're doing some dirty work. You're cleaning, you're painting, you're working in your garden, whatever kind of manual labor. Clothes are going to get ruined in the process of that. Of course, you're not going to wear good clothes to do that work that you're going to ruin. Right? So there, of course, you wear clothes that are appropriate for that. And in fact, it's israf. We have other hadith that say israf is not having many clothes. Right? People will come and say, what if a person has 100 pairs of clothes? Is that israf? Is that extravagance? And the Imam say, no, israf is not in how many clothes you have. Israf is in how you use those clothes. If you wear your dressiest clothes to go and do manual labor, that's israf. Right? So you wear appropriate clothes at every circumstance. Home is not one of those circumstances where you can say, well, no one's around, or it's just my husband, just my wife, just my kids, so who cares what I look like? Right? We should be conscious of how we look. And there, in your mind, you think, well, that's probably talking about women. The women should dress nicely at home. The hadith actually tells us that it's important for a man to dress very nicely at home. Imam Rida says, تَهْيَئَةُ الرَّجُلِ لِلْمَرْأَةِ مِمَّا تَزِيدُ فِي عِفَّتِهَا. Now, one of the ways to increase the chastity of your wife is by looking good yourself. It works both ways. Right? If I'm going to look terrible at home and everywhere else on the street everyone looks nice, and I dress up for people outside, but at home I dress terribly, right? What kind of message does that send? How much care does that say that I have for what my spouse and my children think of me? Right? So one of the ways to increase her chastity and make her look only at you and not look at other people is make yourself look worthy of her gaze. So dress nicely, groom yourself, not only in terms of dressing, but in terms of how you groom yourself, your beard, your hair, the way you comb, the way you smell, like all those different aspects that go into your appearance, pay attention to all of that, even in the context of your home. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wasalam says, لِيَتَزَيَّنْ أَحَدُكُمْ لِأَخِيهِ إِذَا أَتَاهُ كَمَا يَتَزَيَّنُ لِلْغَرِيبِ الَّذِي يُحِبُّ أَنْ يَرَاهُ فِي أَحْسَنِ الْهَيْئَةِ. So again, we have this attitude sometimes where if I'm going to go meet someone for the first time, I want to make a good first impression. Right? So I'm going to go for a job interview, let me look my best. I'm going to go and meet this person for a proposal, let me look my best. Right? Those places where we think first impressions are important, there we're ready to say, yes, I'll look my best. Well, he says, even if you're just meeting your brother in faith, a friend of yours, prepare for that person and dress for that person the same way you would dress for that unfamiliar person that you want to make a good first impression on. Right? Use the same kind of attentiveness when you're preparing yourself for your interactions with your own friends and your own brethren. Right? So that's the kind of attentiveness they want us to give. One last hadith says, this is from Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam. So when we wear our clothes, this is also a spiritual experience. It can be, especially if we pay attention to the verses I talked about earlier. In the first khutbah, right, the clothing that we're given by Allah is a blessing. If we can recall that blessing as we wear our clothes, then this is also a means for us to get closer to Him by remembering the blessing, thanking Him for it, and now making dua that we can use this clothing, this blessing, in a way that is pleasing to Him. And so we have several du'as that are narrated from the Ahlul Bayt with regard to clothing. This one from Imam Sadiq says that when you wear your clothing, say the following: Allahumma ja'alhu thawba yumnin wa baraka. Oh Allah, make this clothing a clothing that's full of auspiciousness and that's a source of blessing. Allahumma arzuqni fihi shukra ni'matik wa husna ibadatik wal amala bi ta'atik. So let me wear these clothes, let it be a source of me thanking you for your blessing. Right? So I'm not wearing the clothes with the attitude that this is something I worked hard for and I spent my own hard-earned money and it's all about me and what I've done, or I'm going to look so good and this is what people are going to think. Like, that should not be the first thought that we have. Bring it back to Allah and realize this is a blessing that He's given, and let our first thought be that this is an opportunity for me to thank Him for this blessing He's given me. So let these clothes be a way for me to thank you for the blessing that you've given me. And secondly, for me to do ibadah in it, to do good ibadah in this clothing. Now, one of the conditions for praying is satr, that we cover ourselves decently. Right? So we know the legal rulings for that. The akhlaqi ruling is that you should dress in your best clothes. خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ. Dress in your best clothes. Right? But we want to wear clothes that are conducive to ibadah. Right? So think if you have, I bought a shirt recently, of all places, Iran. And when I brought it home and wore it for the first time, it was time for prayer. I pulled my sleeves up to try to do wudu. I couldn't even pull the sleeves up. They had made it so tight and without any accommodation for wudu that I couldn't even do wudu in those clothes. Right? So those are not good clothes, because it's not clothing that's conducive to ibadah. I had to modify it and cut it and put buttons and stuff so I could pull it high enough that I could do wudu. Right? But our clothing should be conducive to that. So if you're wearing clothes that are too tight, it has ethical problems, that's one thing. But if you can't get on your knees and do sajda properly and easily, then there's something wrong with that clothing. That's not libas that's going to be conducive to the purpose that Allah has given you that libas for. وَالْعَمَلْ بِطَاعَتِكَ. And I'm going to wear these clothes in my life. Let me wear these clothes only when I'm doing your service and obeying you. That's a beautiful dua. And finally he says, Alhamdulillah alladhi razaqani ma asturu bihi awrati wa atajammalu bihi fil nas. Praises to Allah who has given me something. He's talking about that verse that we read from Surah Al-A'raf. He's given me clothing that I can use to cover my body, and I can also use it to adorn myself as I walk amongst people. Okay, so think about these points in the dua as you wear your clothes, and that wearing of your clothes then becomes a form of ibadah and a way of getting closer to Allah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inna a'tainaka al-kawthar fasalli li rabbika wanhar inna shani'aka huwa al-abtar. Salawat ala Muhammad. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وأن عليا ولي الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.